morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm saying that being mindful of our online audience joining us from different parts of the world. I'm Monica Setia, India Associate Country Director at the Lakshmi, Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, Harvard University. I welcome everyone in this room and over Zoom to the book discussion today that we're organizing jointly with Harvard Club of India, along with the support from India International Center and Penguin India. In the next almost 1 hour, we all will be in company of Gurcharan Das, author of this book, Another Sort of Freedom, and the discussant Hitesh Hathi, Executive Director of the Mittal South Asia Institute at Harvard. The initial conversation between Gurcharan Das and Hitesh will be followed by a round of questions and answers with the audience for around 15 or 20 minutes. We request all audience joining us online to use the Q&A box feature in the Zoom to post their questions, and members in the room to raise their hand if they have a question. At this time, we request everyone in the hall to please put their phones on silent. We like to inform you that drinking water is made available outside in the lobby area, and the rest areas are on the floor below in the basement of the building, which is accessible through a staircase or an elevator just outside the entrance door while you go on your right. Without any further delay, let me introduce Hitesh Hathi, the discussant for this evening. Hitesh is the Executive Director of the Lakshmi, Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, based out of Cambridge, Boston at Harvard University. Hitesh has a long and rich experience in leadership and management with South Asia. He worked as a producer for one of Boston's leading NPR stations for over 20 years. Thank you so much, Hitesh, for agreeing to do this while on a short trip to India. Gurcharan Das, as many of you know, is a celebrated author and public intellectual. He graduated in philosophy with honors from Harvard University and was later inducted into Phi Beta Kappa for a high attainments in liberal scholarship. He also attended Harvard Business School, where he is featured in 4 case studies. He was CEO of Procter & Gamble India and Managing Director of Procter & Gamble Worldwide before he retired at 50 to become a full-time writer. He has written 8 remarkable books, the latest being The Dilemma of an Indian Liberal. Thank you, Gurcharan ji, for giving us this opportunity for the book discussion and also giving your readers those remarkable books. May I request both Hitesh and Gurcharan to please come up on the stage, as all of us in the room look forward to a stimulating conversation, trying to understand the profound message behind, in Gurcharan's own words, make a life, not just a living. Enjoy the conversation, everyone, and I look forward to interacting with some of you after the session. Thank you again for joining us.
Monica, thank you for that gracious introduction. Gurcharanji, it's really an honor to be with you here. I don't know if I deserve to be on the same stage, so I'll try to hold up my end as best I can.
And please don't say G. You make me feel old. I already am. I don't want to know it.
Well, what is that line from Mir? यूं गई कद के खम हुए जैसे उम्र एक रह रहे सारे पुल. Anyway, not to go to Mir, because they're here for a treat. I have to say that on the one hand, I'm very honored to be here with Gurcharan. It's hard not to say G, and a little intimidated. It's, as you see, an extraordinary life, and we'll hear more about it. On the other hand, I'm also a little bit mad at him, because one of the pleasures of my work is to come into contact with extraordinary people who've lived truly original lives. That would be you. The problem is that when you pick up their book, you can't put it down. It comes at the cost of your sleep. So let me warn all of you who are going to buy any of the books outside, it'll cost you some weeks of sleep, as many books as you buy. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And listen, this may feel a little bit, so we've been thinking about ways to talk about this extraordinary life and this way of reflecting about life, which is, I find, something very powerful in what you do. And one of the first things I thought of is, you're calling this a memoir, not an autobiography. So everything about you is highly intentional and at the same time, highly unintentional, but there's something to it. What is it?
Well, certainly, first of all, it's so nice to see so many friends here. And this is a so much friendlier format, frankly, for a get-together. It really does feel, but the expectations are that we are going to perform a cabaret. Now somebody's going to pick up and start dancing.
He's taken the Liza Minnelli role. That's what I want to say.
Anyway, there is a difference. I didn't realize it, but there is a difference between a memoir and an autobiography. An autobiography is a chronological telling of your life. I was born here, I went to school here, and so on and on and on, boringly on. A memoir tries to find some pattern in one's life. It tries to connect the dots and find something there and then stick to that. Of course, you then have to give up certain stories of certain parts of your life. But at the end of the day, it means reliving your life. And the lesson I have learned, and that's why it's a tip to all of you. The lesson I've learned is that reliving your life is better than living it. And why? Why? Because you can play God. In reliving your life, you are connecting the dots. And also you're choosing what to put in. But also, it's like it consists of memories. That's the word memoir also comes. And memories, that famous Japanese Kurosawa made a film. Um, God, this is one's getting.
Ran? No?
No, no, no,
Seven Samurai?
no, no, no. Rashomon.
Rashomon,
That's
okay.
why it's called the Rashomon effect.
Yes.
The Rashomon effect is a murder has taken place, and the judge is presented with 5 witnesses by the police, and they all tell a different story. The judge, I mean, there are 5 different killers identified by these 5 witnesses. And the judge, of course, is totally falls off his chair. But it is true that when you're living your life, so much is happening, and that you don't notice half the things that are going on. And that's why some people remember the event in a certain way, other people remember it in a different way. And and the point I'm making here is that when you're looking at an event after 50 years or whatever, you have infused 50 years of your life into that event. It's not the person who's acting 50 years earlier. You're the 70-year-old person who fell in love at 20, you see?
And he did. You
And
can read about it.
And so that's why I say, you get to know yourself. And all philosophers from Socrates onwards have reminded us to know yourself. So if you want to know yourself, you don't have to publish the book. Write a memoir.
So, we were thinking about Rashomon, you were complaining about remembering, but you remember an extraordinary amount. And I just want to quote one line here, if you will forgive me. What do I have in common with a 2.5-year-old child whose photograph my mother used to keep adoringly on her mantelpiece? Nothing, except that I happen to be the same person. I was born in Lyalpur, Punjab during World War II when Hitler, Churchill, and Hirohito were bashing everyone about. How do I remember the daft things I did at 4 when I can't even remember what I said yesterday? So how do you remember? It's an extraordinary set of memories, and the way you connect them is very powerful.
Well, I was lucky. My mother went to Connect College, Lahore. And there she met a teacher who taught her, who told her to keep a diary. And so my mother had a diary. And I appear on page 17 of the diary soon after I'm born. And what does she write? This is a restless baby. 6 months later, I have become a difficult child. A year later, he's a troublemaker. And so at 3, I learned to run. And I've been running ever since. and often running into myself. When I went to kindergarten, I raised my hand, and my teacher said nahi, and every day she kept saying nahi, nahi, and then she said, I was always wanted to do something that was not allowed, and so she says, we'll call you Nahi Kumar. That will be just easier than Nahi. But they gave me a name. They gave me the name Ashok Kumar. That was my name. But my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, gave me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with a Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. And so that didn't do. So she took me to a guru, placed me at his feet, and said, Maharaji anu na deo. And so he looks at me and smiles. And then he says, Acha BBA, you put him right there at my feet. Mere charna te paya hai, te enu Gurcharan das bulavange. So I was overnight transformed from Ashok Kumar, the Prince of Happiness, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru. And some years later, Hitesh, I asked the Guru, I said, why did you give me that name? He said, well, you know, it's a good thing to be reminded of humility once in a while. And then he gave the very best definition of humility I have heard, which is, I'll read it it's the dedication now to the book, the advice he gave. It was basically to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And so I have dedicated, it became my motto. And actually the secret code to another sort of freedom. And that is to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously.
Wait, you can applaud. You can applaud if you want. It is very nice to have you all here, and also people online. It's i- the interactions with. Oh, thank you. The interactions with your guru are actually he was your father's guru, really,
Yeah.
are very, very powerful. One of those moments, and maybe you can talk about it, is you spent some time with your siblings when you were very little, and you were a constant nuisance. And there were those who were bothered by you, and the guru who felt that there was something higher to learn and think about. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, that's a chapter called the slippery bananas. And yeah, our friends in modern school would be taken to Kashmir for a holiday, and we were taken to the ashram in Bias for a holiday. And we were told by my father, we are going to meet God. And so fine, that's a good reason to go. We thought that the guru had a straight line to God. And in fact, that's how we justified it to our friends going to Kashmir. And so one day, my brother and I, we were playing cricket, and the satsang was going on. And my brother hit a straight drive right to the feet of the guru. And I charged in to pick up the ball. And the satsang stopped. And everybody, all 5,000 people, eyes turned to the fielder running for the ball. And then I picked up the ball. I looked at the guru. He gave a smile. And I ran out. And so, and the guru smiled and continued the satsang. But our neighbor, who was a recent convert to satsang Radha Swami Vyas, he was very upset with my mother, and he said, "What is this? You know, we have come all the way for this satsang from hundreds of miles, and you got tada munda ke kya kar rahe hai?" And so anyway, we got a little bit of a. My father was a little more relaxed, but this neighbor didn't like it, and so we had to take revenge on our neighbor. And so and he was lived right next door and on the same floor. And so one day, people had gone to satsang, etc. And so we were eating bananas. And so we knew that you could slip on a banana peel, you see. So but the trick was to how to throw it from the window so that it landed in certain way that the person getting onto it would slide. And we tried, these trial shots we did while this was going on, my brother and I and my sister. And so we were four of us. And my brother was standing guard so that if anybody came in, we'd hide the thing. Anyway, we picked up the banana leaves banana skins, brought them back. And when our neighbor decided to go out, our brother gave us the warning, and we chucked the banana skins from the window. And sure enough, he fell down.
He was not injured, perhaps only unhappy. But that was perhaps more his habit.
No, he went to the security office to complain and all that. Anyway.
I want to say, as I thought of that, and as I was reading the book, when I got to the latter chapters where you had your extraordinary successes in business, I thought that persistence, learning exactly how to throw the banana skin and finding the right moment to throw it and having a system in place, that was already in evidence, that persistence which made you successful as a CEO. Look, we could spend a lot of time on your childhood, but there's a section here which is very, very painful. You point out that one of the, maybe one, I don't know, one of the sorrows of our collective life in your life is we as a society have never fully come to terms with partition. Partition came smack in the middle of this beautiful childhood. There's a couple of true, I mean, I'm shuddering to think of it. There are a couple of truly disturbing stories in there. Do you mind, and with your indulgence, do you mind talking about partition for a little bit?
Well, it's the year 1947. Sorry, it's the year 1947. And in March that year is when I first discovered the modern idea of the absurd. And I'm in kindergarten in Lahore, and everybody in our class had a pencil box, except one kid who sits next to me. He's poor, and he's a Muslim boy. His name is Ayan. And there's a boy in front of me has two pencil boxes. Everybody has one, but he has two. He's the richest kid in class. We all walk to school. He comes in a car. And so when everybody goes out at recess one day, I take the rich kids, that extra pencil box, and I put it on the desk of Ayan, thinking some kind of a Marxist instinct very early of redistribution. And the class convenes, and everybody comes back, and the rich kid screams, "Who stole my pencil box?" And the teacher also now is worried because he's the richest kid in class. And so we all stand up, and everybody's turn to ask who knows about this. And when it comes to Iron's turn, he says, yes, there's a pencil box in front of me, but I don't know who put it. Nobody believes him. And then it comes my turn, and I'm frozen. I mean, this is my time to save the poor boy because anyway, then nobody believes him. I don't do my duty. And and the teacher calls Iron in front because he's the obvious guilty one. And he she punishes him, gives him a ruler, slap of the ruler or something. And that is the moment when I discovered temporary insanity and the idea of the absurd. That here I was doing something good, and look at the difficulty of being good, thinking of the title of the other book I wrote. Anyway, that year, a few months later, it's August 1947, Azadi and partition. On 17th of January, they have announced that Lahore is going to Pakistan and our lives are in danger. Already, the Muslim, there are vigilante groups who have started going around checking the Hindu houses that are to be attacked. And so we have to flee for our lives with the clothes behind our back. And um, we have to flee. And we cross the border and we have to catch a train from there, from Jalandhar station. And we are sitting in the compartment, and through the window, we see my parents and I and my siblings. We see a handsome policeman, tall, who's guarding the peace on the platform. And two boys come from the back out of nowhere, and they put their kirpans through him, and he falls down, and the rest of the scene is all red and blood. And I asked my mother what happened, and she shuts the window as a reply, and she can't give an answer. But this is again the temporary insanity. The only difference is the insanity that grips groups, especially groups of the religious faithful, is a far greater one that grips an individual, as I did.
And there's another difference between those two stories. You and Ayan became friends. His family played a part in saving your family afterwards because you had become good friends. But of course, the partition is not yet healed. I don't know if you're reflecting on that and how you do these days.
Yeah, well, I think the only one healing touch I can think of is the healing touch. If we go back in history, Tolstoy wrote a book called War and Peace, and he brought closure to the Russian mind after the Napoleonic Wars. And I'm waiting for our Tolstoy to come, to emerge, who too will help us get hopefully some kind of closure. Because certainly this government has reminded us all over again of the wounds of partition.
I think we could talk about partition for a long time. So I want to take a moment and pause and maybe move on knowing that this is a pause in our collective consciousness also that somehow all of us have to address individually and as a society. But I want to move on to your own story. From partition, you find yourself in Shimla, from Shimla to America, and a kind of different quest begins in your life. And that quest is to make a life. And I think you have these two extraordinary influences on you, your mother and your father, quite different characters. I'm just astonished by how extraordinary their differences are, and yet how you somehow have assimilated them. So talk about this making a life and what you mean by it and what led you on that path.
Uh, Hitesh, before I do that, if I may, let me just tell you my first encounter in America. I'm 13 years old. My father has been transferred to Washington, D.C., where the World Bank is mediating a dispute between India and Pakistan,
The Indus Water
Indus,
Treaty.
what became the Indus Water Treaty. And Pakistan has sent 125 lawyers. India has sent 3 engineers. And the first thing the president of the World Bank says is to the Pakistanis, please send all the 125 lawyers back. And by the end of the week, send 3 engineers, which is what they did. And that's why the treaty finally got settled. And the reason why World Bank is involved is because they're going to give money for the development of the Indus Basin, the rivers of the Punjab. And on my first day in school, I'm put into Roosevelt High School. And on the very first day at Roosevelt High School, um, I come home and my mother realizes that I'm way ahead of my class. So she goes charging in the next day to the vice principal, and who's a redneck from Virginia. And she says to him that, look, give him a test. I was in modern school here in Delhi when my father was transferred. And also, at least if you don't put him in a different grade, put him in a section where the class was divided into college preparatory people and vocational. They'd put me in vocational. So my mother makes that request. And the principal looks at my skin and he says, son, in America, colored boys not supposed to get too big for their boots. And my mother is shocked. She's never encountered, this is her first encounter with racism. And then the principal says, welcome to the American dream. You work hard, boy, stay out of trouble, and you get a diploma when you graduate. And there are a lot of factories opening up in Maryland and Virginia. And you get a good factory job. Welcome to the American dream. So he had a dream for me, Hitesh. And 3 years later, I got my revenge on him. I stood first in my class, and I got scholarships to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. And nobody had done that in the school during the life of the principal. So he called me in. He was reading the Washington Post. My picture's there on page 5. And he's saying, oh, we're proud of you, son, etc., etc. And you brought, honor to the school. And so I'm tempted to remind him that was the same idea, same guy who had a different dream for me, a few years earlier. And, but I'm too much of a gentleman to do that. And, but you're right. Now I want to answer your question, Hitesh.
Well, actually, now I'm going to interrupt you because there's a delicious story here that I don't want to leave out, which is how you cracked the racism code when it came to playing Spin the Bottle.
Oh, wow.
Those
Yes.
of you who don't know this game, you spin a bottle. And if you're spinning, whomever it is pointing towards, you have to kiss or something has to happen. But
But-
racism is involved.
Well, so there was a girl in my class who invited me to her birthday party. And she had liberal parents, so they invited black people, white people, you know, and we had lots of good eats. I hadn't eaten so well until then. And then when we are stuffed up, we sit around, make a circle, and we spin. And as Hitesh just told you, wherever the mouth of the bottle points to, you're supposed to kiss the girl or the person of the opposite sex. But the unwritten rule in this particular party was that black boys kissed only black girls and white boys only kissed white girls. So, but when it came to my turn, everybody was confused. What was I going to do? Was I going to? And so I solved the problem instantly. I kissed every one of them. I kissed black girls. I kissed white girls. I kept getting bonus turns. I kept kissing all evening. And that was the best day of my life.
So, as I was reading this memoir late into the night and not sleeping, I thought this is why I've led a relatively unsuccessful life, because I hadn't cracked the racism code in America in the 70s when I was a teenager. And this gentleman clearly had. There was since you're also a classic scholar, I immediately thought of there's a beautiful poem from Catullus, the Latin poet, who says, "Dami basi amile dein decentum," give me 1,000 kisses and then 100 and 1,000 more. And I thought, damn, I only read about those, and this guy did it. But anyway, getting to the more important stuff.
So to answer your question, so by now my parents have gone back. The Indus water disputes on good shape. Mr. Nehru was very happy, and I had graduated. I went home for the summer, and I'm ready to go back to. I've decided to go to Harvard, and my mother has tears in her eyes at Palam Airport, and she's telling me now, go and study something useful. You have to make a living. Why don't you be like your father, an engineer? You engineers, she said, engineers always get jobs in India. And so I sign up for engineering when I arrive at Harvard. And I have a roommate. And my roommate is studying Russian literature. And he's reading Anna Karenina. And at lunch one day, he tells me, Gurcharan, if you're going to have an affair with a married woman one day, it should be someone like Anna Karenina. And then he starts telling me about Anna Karenina and what a great woman she is. And I'm thinking that look at him dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina, and here I am calculating pipe friction, I'm mugging up Bernoulli's equations. Something is wrong. And so I immediately go and change my major. And and what do I study the first 2 years? Truly, that's what makes Harvard such a feast. I study Greek tragedy. I study a course in the comic spirit. I study Bauhaus architecture, Renaissance painting. I take a course on Beethoven. I even take a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears that I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she says, "Hi, hi, mera munda." She says, "Dead language. Only the dead will now give him a job." And that's when my father has to reassure her that, look, says to her, he's making a life through books. All his life he has to, to get a job, do something useful, as you say. And anyway, so I graduated in philosophy from Harvard, Hitesh. And then, of course, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to Oxford to do a PhD. So I'm back in Chandigarh for the summer.
So we're there. And I have to say, I actually went to Harvard to study Sanskrit. And what a Harvard of your day. I mean, so I'm just reading through the book and the names, and I'm making a note of them. Watson, Galbraith, that is John Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist and ambassador to India. Henry Kissinger, Rawls, Edward Said, the author of Orientalism, Paul Tillich, Daniel Ingalls, the greatest Sanskritist of the era, Berlin. I mean, it's an extraordinary group of people that you studied with. You're admitted to philosophy, and then you find yourself in Bombay. So here's one of those where life takes a turn.
And life did take a turn because one evening in Chandigarh, waiting to go to do a PhD, I asked myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. I want a life of action. And what is that life of action? I don't know. But a retired judge who's a friend of our family gave me a book to read called The Mouse Merchant. You know, because you're a Sanskrit scholar, it's a 13th century anthology of stories called Katha Sarit Sagara. And in it is a story called The Mouse Merchant. And if I can take 1.5 minutes, I think it's the most inspiring story of entrepreneurship. Yeah, and it's 30, I mean, it's 1,000 years old in Sanskrit. And it's a story about a boy who becomes, when he becomes 17 years old, his mother, who is poor, she tells him, no, you're not going to grow up to do what I do. She cleans houses to make a living and to raise him. She says, I've raised you, you've studied in school. Now you have a destiny. Go to the house over there where the richest man in our town lives. And he's a good man, and he'll give you some advice. So the boy does what the mother says, and he waits for the great man in this great mansion in front, and he sees a dead mouse in the courtyard. So when the man comes out, he says, he smiles at the boy, and he says, what can I do for you? And he says, the boy says, can I have the dead mouse? And the man laughs. He says, people come to me for a job, for money, or something useful, and you'll be doing me a favor by taking that mouse. Can't I do anything else for you? The boy says, no, thank you. Takes that dead mouse. He knows a widow in their neighborhood who has a cat. So he sells the dead mouse as cat food. And with a few paisa he earns, he goes to the bazaar and he buys chana, nice spicy chana chor garam, and he makes pudiyas out of it. And with a ghada of pani, he goes to the town square where he knows loggers will come in the afternoon to rest and to put down their heavy, heavy load on their heads and their backs. And at that time, he offers each one pani, water, and a pudiya of snack. And they're so grateful, but they have no money. So they all give him one log of wood. And so next day, he sells a log, buys better chana, better snacks he makes, and he repeats this for the next 3 months. By then, logging stops in the forest because the monsoon, the rains come. and the price of timber starts shooting up in the market. He has a house full of logs and he starts unloading his logs when the prices are rising. And by the end of the season, he has made enough money to buy a shop in the timber market, and he sets himself up in business. He has one competitive advantage. The loggers know him and they love him. So they bring their choicest logs to him first. And so he prospers. He prospers and has a successful business, and he has extra money. And he realizes that there's margin in selling wood is not as much as if you convert that wood into ships. So he finds a master carpenter shipbuilder, makes him his partner, finances him, and that man starts making ships, and they are in business, and that business does very well, his subsidiary. And then he finds out that actually there's more money in shipping than even making ships, sending cargo and passengers. And so he finds a retired captain, starts a third subsidiary, and is now in a thriving shipping business. And by the age of 25, he has become the richest man in town. And then he goes to a jeweler, asks him to make him a mouse, a gold mouse. And he takes that gold mouse to that richest man in town. And he tells him that and then he tells him his story and tells him that this is his return on investment that he got from the dead mouse that he took from his house. And the rich man is so happy to hear the story that he gives his daughter in marriage to this boy.
So I'm observing parenthetically that as you read the book, you'll see that there's always some love and Shringara Rasa at the end of almost all of Gurcharan's stories. Here you have marriage. It just observing parenthetically, before we get into Vix Vegapuram, think of this Kathasarit Sagar, by the way, is Salman Rushdie, one of his favorite books, Salman Rushdie. He often talks about it. And that's the same gentleman who said he never understood the partition because, as his father said to him, the religion of Bombay is business. And, building ships, all navies were built in India into the 16th, 17th century, the Ottoman Navy, etc. So these stories incorporate so much of our history that we've forgotten. But let's get to Vix Vaporub.
Well, so the one, I'm in Chandigarh and I've decided that I'm not going anywhere. I mean, not going to Oxford. I've written off to Oxford that I'm not coming. And my mother's worst nightmare has come true. She has a grown up, unemployed son at home. And as they say, Vela in Punjab. And we have a nosy neighbor in Sector 9 who comes to visit my mother. And every day she asks her, Thoda munda ki kar rahe hai? And my poor mother gets very embarrassed. And, and so I see this embarrassment on her face for a couple of days. And I say, this is not right. I answer the first advertisement in the paper, and it's from a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub. And so even though I don't know anything about business, they take me on as a trainee. And that's how I go into the business world. Suddenly, I shift from the ivy-covered halls of Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India, going from chemist shop to chemist shop, saying, "Aaj the egg dozen, egg free. Kitna dozen chahiye?" And so that's quite a change in life.
But you see how the banana peel story is also relevant. There's determination there. So look, we are running a little bit behind schedule. So if the audience will allow, I wanted to ask a couple of maybe 2 or 3 more questions to round up. and then we'll open to questions from the audience and also online. Is that all right? Wonderful. So, look, when you talk about Vicks Vapor Rub, I'm also thinking you were doing this at the height of the license Raj. And you're now famously a liberal, an economic liberal, right? So what changed? How did you, who talked about socialism, who had trained with the philosopher Rawls, you know, what led to this turn for you? Was there a critical moment?
Well, there was a flu one year, and we sold a lot of Vicks Vapor Rub. And we thought we'd done a lot of good that year, keeping store shelves stocked. We ran 3 shifts. And at the end of the season, um, the company made record profits, but we got a summons from Delhi saying that we had broken the law. And the law that we had broken, and they wanted me to come to Delhi. By then, I had risen in the company. And so the law we had broken was the license law. It was license Raj. We were allowed to sell only so many tons of Vicks, and we had exceeded by 30% or something. And so I was asked, I came to the office of a joint secretary, and he made me wait for quite a long time. I was accompanied by 2 lawyers who were shivering. And so we were let into the room, and the guy was reading the paper, and he didn't put the paper down. We sat down, we waited patiently, too polite to tell him that, that we were there. And, but he finally put his papers down and says, Kya? And I said, Saab, aap bataiye kya? ये समन्स आपने भेजा है. So he says, let me see the summons, मुझे दिखाइए. So he says, you've broken the law. And I explained, bhai, it's not our fault. There was a flu, and we thought we were doing something good for the country. And we helped so many millions of families during this period. And but then he listens to me, and says, but you broke the law. And I said, yes, we did break the law. So you admit it? I said, yes. Well, he says, no, I'm sorry, but the law will take its course. And jao. And at the end, when I come to the end of I'm going out, and at the door, I turn around and I tell him, sir, this news is going to come out. It's not every day an executive of a multinational company is sent to jail. And what will you think people, and the news will be, we are an American company. So what do you think people are going to say? And he says, I said, what would you think they read why this guy went to jail? What will they think of our country and our laws? And he says, are you threatening me? I said, no. I said, this will happen. I'm not going to leak out the khabar. Khabar phail jayegi. And he says, jao. So when I come out, the lawyers say, you idiot, you should have fallen at his feet, begged for mercy, etc. And you were out there saying, anyway, the point is the government, somebody saw sense, and the government dropped quietly the whole subject. The inquiry was closed. And but I joined the Swatantra Party. I said, this is madness. This is another, that absurdity I had observed during the partition was the same absurdity of that I saw of uh, in that event. And I became a classical liberal. We had all been socialists before. And yes, I had met Berlin, and I mean, I had taken a course from Isaiah Berlin, etc. So I had realized the problems of socialism then, but that was theoretical. This was real life. And
I mean, it's still for those in the audience who are younger, the Swatantra Party wanted economic liberalization, what you might call the Japanese or the South Korean or Taiwanese model, Singaporean model of development, which maybe would have led India to different places. I'm still staggered by the thought that for selling extra Vicks vapor rubs in the middle of a flu epidemic, you might have gone to prison were it not for the fact that you were heading international company. I want at some point after this very distinguished business career, you quit, and I want to ask about that. But I just want to stop here for a second and say we are at an extraordinary moment in Indian history. The skeptics, Indian skeptics and foreign skeptics, a few weeks ago had written off Indian democracy. And we can all have very different opinions about the outcome of the election, but the one thing we can all agree on is that the Indian electorate has once again shown itself to be vibrantly democratic. And Indian democracy continues to kick and remain unexpected. Um, what do you think of a moment like this, given your long experience with the trajectory of Indian development, political, social, cultural, economic?
well, I mean, I still am a classical liberal, and for me, India got its freedom not in 1947. We got our political freedom, but in 1991, we got our economic freedom. And so that was a very important chapter. And as for liberalism, I think we still need Indian liberals to thrive. And what is a liberal is basically someone who's who um, who's mm, who's accepting of another person's point of view. I mean, the difference today is that if you're not on one side, you have lost your friends. You have to take sides. And as a liberal, you have to learn to respect both sides. The even the leftists who I don't particularly like, but they have their uses. They remind us of the poor. And the right, they also remind us about the value of community and the continuity of life, and so on. And I can only quickly, if we have a minute, I'll just tell one last story, and that is what happened to me, which confirmed to me the the value of being a liberal. I was in Madras, and I had to take a flight back to Delhi. This was many years ago, and since I had a few hours to kill, I went to the museum. The Madras Museum is famous for its Chola bronzes. And there's a wonderful bronze statue of Shiva, Nataraja, the Tandav dance of Shiva. And so I'm admiring this the weightlessness of the dancing Shiva, and admiring the work of the Chola artist who has created it. And behind me is a woman who's barefoot. She's wearing a silk sari, and she's uh, and I go this way and look at the others, and she goes, and while I watch her, because she goes and puts a vermilion mark on the Shiva. And I'm horrified. I said, doesn't she know this is not a temple? This is a museum. And then I go on, look at the other sculptures, and with my sort of niggling mind, one statue is covered with dust, and I said, "Saaf nahi karte." And then another one is badly lit, and so I go around, and then I come back, and she's still there. And now there's one difference. There's a marigold flower at his feet. And but I have a very different reaction. I suddenly say to myself that what I was admiring was, and because I'm a sort of secular, not, well, an agnostic, may not be a full for atheist, despite my father who was a mystic, but I'm, um, after Harvard, you can't, philosophy at Harvard ruins you forever. You can't have faith. And so uh, but I say to myself that look at her and look at me. I'm just admiring an object of beauty. She is face to face with eternity. She is seeing Shiva creating the universe in that dance. And for her, how much richer is her experience, the darshana that she is having versus mine. And not that I would become a believer, but I can suddenly appreciate someone with a very opposite, with a very opposite belief than I. And I think that's what a liberal is. A liberal, even somebody who has the most, opposite belief. And that's partly why this today, with this polarization, either you're with us or you're against us. It's not only in India, but it's in your country right now, in a bad way too. So that was the lesson this South Indian lady, barefoot, has taught me.
So let me turn to the audience with just one last question, because everything you have said is in fact pregnant with the answer that I think you might give. But you were at the peak of a career in business. You were maybe at the vanguard. I mean, today we're used to seeing Indians at the heads of international companies, Indians playing a, a vast role in international business. But you were among the first, if not the very first. And all of a sudden, you give all of that up and you leave the world of business. Why? And after that, we'll turn to your questions.
Okay. Well, I can, the story of my quitting the business world it's here in the book, and it's fairly mundane story because I'm going to work one day I'm at that time in the headquarters of P&G in Cincinnati, Ohio. And on the way to work, I turn on the radio, the NPR station comes on, and I hear that the reforms in India are in trouble. And that is true 2-3 years after the reforms. Everybody was pouncing on poor Narasimha Rao, while Manmohan Singh is being acclaimed as a hero. But poor Narasimha Rao, the way Congress party treated him and how he has become a kind of villain is really a very sad story. But in my case, for me, you see, Azadi was 1991. And when I see that, to me, it was the last hope of the Indian poor. All the first years from 47 to 91, we were following a certain model which did, in the name of the poor, did very little for the poor. And after 91, you all know the story. 450 million people have risen out of poverty. Middle class has grown from 10 to 30%. Now, it's not the, we're still a work in progress. The problem is we still haven't created enough jobs. But nevertheless, we have risen as a country. And these reforms were the reason for it. And these were in trouble at that time. I don't know if you remember, but there was a serious danger of the left wing of the Congress party reversing a lot of the decisions. And that scared me. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that was the trigger. I shot off a telegram to Manmohan Singh because I'd met him when he was a junior guy in the finance ministry. And so he was very, very kind. He replied, and I'd asked him, why is no one selling the reforms? We were doing chupke, chori, chori, the reforms at night, and as if that nobody would notice, and but. Anyway, he said, okay, no one's selling the reforms here, you come back and you help us do it. And by then I had already written a few books, written op-eds and so on. So I came back and I quit my job and I came back.
And in fact, you always return to India, unlike many who don't. So, listen, as you talk about the journey of India and Azadi, I'm also thinking we should think about, you know, Chale Chalo Zil Abhi Nahi Aayi. But in any case, questions from the audience and online, we'll take a few questions. Sir, would you wait for the microphone, sir? And please say who you are and your question.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Surat Singh. I attended both Harvard, Oxford. I read Vedas in Sanskrit in original, and I'm a Supreme Court lawyer. Now, I had difficulty with your good being difficult. And today I discovered why you have a difficulty. When you told the story that you were kind enough and generous enough to took the pencil from the rich and give it to the poor. But when it came to the responsibility, you ran away. So good is not for chicken-hearted. It is for those who take the responsibility. Second thing, you said that when you attend the Harvard, you lost faith. Well, not really. My journey from India to Harvard was a journey from credulity to skepticism, from easy faith to rigorous analysis, and from servile conformity to respectful questioning. I underline the word respectful questioning. Because when you question a thing, first you have to respect. So isn't it possible that after functioning into your easy faith, for a time being, you lose the faith, but then you reconstruct it. So the challenge is being a reconstructed, demystified liberal.
I didn't detect a question there.
Is it possible?
You gave some very good advice. I agree with you.
You are very
And
kind.
so I agree with your advice. So maybe somebody else has a question. This lady here, there's another lady here. She has a question.
Hello, Gurcharan. Hello, Hitesh. Throughout this talk and while reading your book, I have realized you have had quite a journey with finding freedom, whether it was going through the partition trauma, or whether it was joining the Swatantra Party. Like in the beginning, you had mentioned about the memoir, it's about finding pattern. So would you say, like in the title it says another sort of freedom, while were trying to like was your pattern in every phase of your life finding a freedom from what situation you were in?
I think that's a very, very good question. What we haven't done, Hitesh, is we haven't explained what is this another sort of freedom. And that's what she's asking. And That other sort of freedom, yes, in a way, there was a search, always a struggle to find some purpose, some meaning, something, and that's the continuing theme, um, right from childhood onwards. Um and really, it is the the answer, only answer I've found, and that is again a running theme, because there's a wonderful story here about a colleague of mine at work. His name was Kamble, and he was started as a security guard in our company. And the 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 whole idea that the guru's advice, which was to take your work seriously but not yourself seriously, that is still a worthwhile ambition. And I think that's a secret to living a life. That is the source of this kind of freedom. It's my sort of idea. Guru was thinking of moksha, and I'm my own rendering of moksha is the original word in Sanskrit, which just means free, doesn't have that spiritual or religious connotation. So that sense of freedom, that moksha, when you pay your debts, mukti ho gayi, you say. And so that is really the freedom. And I mean, I could talk and on, but I think that we are running out of time. I'm afraid.
More questions, this gentleman in the front, and then we'll go to the back. And we'll end in
Yeah,
after a
sir,
few questions.
you referred about economic freedom 91, and the present situation is like this: 80 crore people are dependent for their food on government for next 5 years, and 100 crore maybe don't have clothes, and 120 crore don't have a house. So this type of freedom economy is having a very big gap between inequality is growing fast, and government is not concerned to take care of these people. It is becoming just a political vote bank. So how to resolve this type of problem?
Well, you pointed out very rightly that India for the last 30 years has grown at 6% a year. Average growth rate, economists will tell you, has been 6. This is impressive growth for 30 years for a country, a democracy, to grow at that rate. But that growth rate has not produced the kind of jobs it should have produced. And that is exactly what Hitesh was hinting at, that the model we have followed has not, as was, we, all the Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and now latest China, they've all followed one single mantra, which is the export of labor intensive manufacturers. Our market share of that in the globe, in the world market, is 2%. 2% is India's share of manufactured goods, and GDP, and it's 15% of GDP. It should be double of that. So how will we take half our people who are employed in agriculture, 45.8% people in agriculture, how will we take them to a better life, more opportunities, more productive work? And they are surplus, underemployed, most of them. And is the only way is factories. And people think that factory, period is over and all that. No, no. We have a good window of 15, 20 years before, all this robotics, etc., artificial, and it will hit white collar jobs much more, much quicker. So it's absolutely right. And I'm so glad all the noises we have heard in this last week after the election, that they have seemed to have recognized that this is the problem. And so we should, if I were Modi today, I would ekagrata, single pointedly work. And it can be done. All we have to do is get big companies to get into this area. All the competitors who are entrenched from even Vietnam and Bangladesh are very large companies employing lakhs of people. Our exporters have got 2,000 people, 1,500 people, but we have to do reforms. Okay, enough.
We should maybe just take two more questions to end, maybe over there.
We have two questions online. I don't want to ignore the online audience. So I was
Oh.
just going to read the two questions. They're both related to 1991. So I'm just going to combine the two questions and then we'll come back to the room. Just quickly.
Okay.
One question is from Vaishnavi, and she's first thanking for the wonderful session. Gurcharan ji, it is a full circle moment for me because my interest is economics started with your books. When did your fascination with 1991 LPG policy start? The next question by Nirmal says, wonderful storytelling. My short question, if 1991 is Azadi, what is 2014?
Okay, the 1991, frankly, I was at that time in India about to go away to this job in headquarters. I was CEO of Procter and Gamble India. And frankly, every Friday, you may remember, go through all the economic times of Fridays. It was like Diwali. A new reform was announced. There was an Amarnath Verma's committee, who deserves a lot of credit. Narasimha Rao, Manmohan Singh gets the credit. Narasimha Rao was the big supporter. None of them was an instinctive reformer. And so, for me, that's how it unfolded before one's eyes, because I could see the damage that 40 years of the license Raj had done to our country. We had lost 2 generations in missed opportunities for young. Today, fortunately, there's a guy called Chandrababu Naidu who has come as a partner, coalition partner. If there is an instinctive reformer in politics, there is Chandrababu Naidu. The way he transformed Hyderabad to Cyberabad, and if anyone goes to Hyderabad, they cannot believe that this is the city, the old Hyderabad. And so I'm so glad that he's a coalition partner, and I do hope he will play a benign role, at least a moral kind of pillar, and with this government, so that we don't fall into the trap of freebies, and we keep on the course that we are. So 2014 was another kind of azadi. You're right, because it was a social revolution. Modi's election was the rickshaw wala, the auto wala, the kirana wala, the lower middle class suddenly seeing a chai wala son become the prime minister, and they felt that now they were, this was our boy. And so in that sense, when the middle class came up in England in the 19th century, it was a very big change, the middle class growth. And there's a very good book by Deirdre McCloskey called The Bourgeois Revolution. And she explains the Industrial Revolution as the middle class, how they are the ones who also need to be credited for it. So I think
We are really at an end. Maybe we can take one very
that
short question.
gentleman is there.
Chandrabhat
who's been asked-
Prasad, but may I ask you to keep it very short, please?
Yes, sir. I wanted to make a correction. My latest book, Caste by 2050, written for Mercator Center, George Mason University. It is true that 80 crore people are taking food from the government. My research shows that 80,000 people don't need that food.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that it was, in fact, when the Food Security Act was enacted in 2012 or 13, or it was in the UPA 2 time. I wrote a number of columns, And I said that they are giving this food now to 68.9% of India, when the poor are about 24, 22% or so. That was the number. And then the Tendulkar line, poverty line. And so, but of course, it helped out during COVID. So in an emergency like COVID, you can justify it. But right now, to say that 800 million people are poor, 80 crore people are poor is absolutely wrong. In fact, one of the statistics that most economists agree on is that the extreme poverty, which is defined by the World Bank's line of $2.15 per day. That's how it's defined internationally. That in India is less than 5% of people. In fact, some people say it's about 2%. But 5%, if you take that below 5%, that means that certainly it's not that number. So it's absolutely right, Chandrabhan, absolutely.
It seems we have, I'm being asked to let you ask a question. So can you make it very brief, please? And please say who you are.
I'm Dr. Deepika Saraf. I'm a pediatrician and a community medicine person. So, I mean, a very different kind of person, So I'm very thankful to you for allowing me to ask the question. First of all, I'm really indebted to Gurcharan ji for writing that book, India Unbound, that really uh, enlightened me a lot. I would like to ask when we had our reforms in 1991, it took us 30 years to start the startup culture, and that too, it has come because people who've gone out and come back to India, they have started that, not people who have been studying here, educated here. So what is it that is a barrier for us to embrace our freedom?
Well, you're right. But it, doesn't happen in history. I mean, 91 is where we got started. So we are a 30-year-old country, not an 80-year-old country, 75-year-old country. And so the best startup story is the mouse merchants, 1100 years ago. And so it's India is a culture of business, but unfortunately we've had this whole training from 47 onwards. We had a prime minister who we really admired, and we still admire Nehru for his great achievements, but he had this one flaw on economics, but the lesson here is that the bureaucracy still doesn't understand the market reform. And Margaret Thatcher used to say that she used to spend 20% of the time reforming and 80% selling the reform. I mean, Manmohan Singh and all did not even sell it to their own party. Congress doesn't believe in those reforms still. And so you have to do that job. Adam Smith's called it an invisible hand. It's invisible. You can't see. How should the millions of people who are working for their profit result in the prosperity of the whole society? It's hard to understand. Nevertheless, I just want to say one thing, that we still do not respect, as a result of all that, we still not respect the businessman. We think he's still a rapacious money grabber. But I'll tell you, since I worked on both sides. I've worked in business and I worked as a writer. And when I became a writer, I thought now I'll become a better human being. Well, it hasn't worked that way. In fact, I've realized something. I realized that actually business people are better people than writers. And why? The business person depends on many, many people for his or her success. He has to have customers. He has to treat his customers well. Even Ratan Tata has to bow down to his customer. So he has to learn respect for the customer. Secondly, he has suppliers. If he's not fair to suppliers, they'll let him down. He has employees. Employees, if you don't, the nice thing, unlike the government job, if you don't like your company, you can move to another one. And so good people will leave you, and all your investment in training will go waste. So business person understands interdependence. That's why I lived my life partly in Bombay and partly in Delhi. And I can tell you, Bombay people are nicer and better people than Delhi people. And the best thing that's happened to Delhi is Gurgaon, because Gurgaon is a city of commerce, and it's teaching these Delhi three types, these big Lutyens three Delhi, where we are now. It's teaching them manners, because in a government, you've got one CEO, and everybody has to bow down to that. It used to be an emperor, now it's CEO, and this particular CEO reminds us every day of that. And so I would say this is a big learning, that we have to learn respect for, there in a if you don't like someone, I mean, if you don't like your boss in the private sector, you go to another company. And there are lakhs of CEOs in Bombay. Here, there's only one CEO. It's a big difference. This is still a feudal society.
I should say that, what do they say in the business? Opinions expressed here are not necessarily the opinions of the sponsoring partners, but belong to the author. But there's so much more we could talk about, but it's 8 o'clock, and I want to also give mukti to all of you. So, I'll leave you just with one line of a teaser. There's so much here to think about. And one point you talk about how even with all you've done, you have this feeling from Seneca that life is passing you by, has passed you by. That's something you want to read about in the book. Take my word for it. But let me conclude this session, first of all, by thanking Gurcharan. Please allow me to call you G once, Gurcharan Ji. I also want to thank both our audience online and all of you here. It's wonderful to have you here. Please join us again at the Mittal Institute. I want to also thank the Mittal Institute's team for putting this together. It's really a wonderful work that they've done to help us put this together. And we've had some extraordinary partners. The institute where we are, the IIC, has just been a wonderful partner for us, and also the Harvard Club of India. And did you want to say a quick word?
Good evening. My name is Vishal Sehgal, and I'm the president of the Harvard Club of India. Thank you, Mr. Das. That's the only way I can avoid the G for this event and for all the events that you've done with us in the past, and we hope that this continues in the future. Thank you, Hitesh, for taking the time to do this event. And thank you, Monica, for partnering with us, and Amit, Sushma, and others in your team who've been wonderful in doing this event. But special thanks go to the nosy neighbor in Chandigarh in Sector 9. Without her, this evening would not have been possible. So thank you. Please convey our regards to her. Thank you very much, everybody.
And speaking of business, let's also thank Penguin for their partnership. And there are still books out there, so please join us outside. Thank you very much. Thank you again.